Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Corey Guckenberger, and Corey is with Back to Back Ministries. And I do believe, Corey, that, first of all, welcome, but you're based out of Ohio, aren't you?
Yep, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Wow. How long have you lived in that area of the world?
Well, I've moved a lot. So before going to the mission field, we lived here for 9 years, and then we left for 8 years, and now we are back, and we've been back for about 7 years.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, you and your husband both raise and live off support, right?
Yes, we both do.
Okay. How long have you guys been kind of in that posture?
We have been on staff for about 14 years, and that's kind of where we just started having to come together because we both had our own obstacles in having to raise funds. So it's been an interesting growth process for us, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. And that's actually why, of course, as you know, I invited you to come on today, is really just to talk about how husbands and wives can work together for MPD. And so we'll dig into that. But before we do, tell us a little bit more about you guys and when you kind of stepped into a full-time ministry role and a little bit about your family. Just let the listeners know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Aaron. As Aaron mentioned, I've been on staff with Back to Back Ministries, which is an orphan care ministry. That is our bullseye. We've been on staff for about 14 years now, a little bit more, and we have 3 children, and they are now in college and one left still in high school. So we're almost empty nesters, but we lived in Monterrey, Mexico for about 4 years, and then we moved to our Nigeria site. We lived there for about 3 years, and now we are both working in our U.S. office, and my husband's the operations director, and I am the ministry partner development coach, and I also work with the staff care team. So it's been quite a process because even the way we raise funds changed and shifted from when we were international to them being in the home office.
Okay. All right. Now, you oversee a lot of people with that MPD process, and you might feel like you're bragging. I'm not asking you to brag, but tell us a little bit about the numbers of people that you have some organizational influence with for the kingdom of God.
Yes, we have about 250 staff with Back to Back Ministries in large. Probably 2/3 of that population group are staff who raise funds. We are in the middle of researching and diving into what it could look like for our nationals to raise support. But at this point right now, it's all our expat staff and our U.S. staff. We all raise support. And so, yeah, I have really, I oversee all of them, but I am always hands-on with all of our new staff in particular from the moment they're hired until the moment they become fully funded.
Great. Well, I think a lot of our listeners are veterans, but we do also have quite a few that are newer to the support raising process. They might have just recently found this podcast, and hopefully they actually subscribed, didn't just listen to this one podcast, but they're subscribing. But with that in mind, I know that we have a lot of people that are married or are getting married and or want to be married sometime, and they're wondering about some of the tensions that come when husband and wives are both raising and living off support. So that's a huge, big, I don't think we could hit that entire topic today. And yet I know that is something that you have walked through. And so let me just kind of hit the ball at you first, if we're playing tennis a little bit and just say, teach, tell us a little bit about some of your observations and things that you've learned over the years.
You're right. This is a huge topic that we'll just, hit some of the iceberg conversation for now.
Okay.
My husband and I, it's interesting, even thinking about this topic, we have probably been transformed in the way we began raising funds together to now. And so I want to speak about one major transformation. It was 7 years ago when we came off of the international field, moving to the stateside. And at that point, we had to raise 2 sets of funds. Internationally, it was just one set as a couple, and now I had a role and he had a role. So we had to up how much we were raising. And then moving back in general, we didn't realize some financial stresses that we were under as a couple until we became freed from them. So I can even speak into, I went to a support raising solutions boot camp. And when I did the Bible study, I was transformed by it. And I know we're talking about couples raising support, but for us, it started with the biblical understanding of generosity. Okay. Once my husband and I realized we had stopped being generous because we were always receivers. And then especially moving back to the States, we kind of started life over, and our 3 kids were like junior high and intermediate school. And we just were kind of overwhelmed in an overwhelming season. And so once he and I did some deep realization and deep kind of uncovering some lack of generosity in our own hearts, we became freed up. But what was interesting, it was an unrealized stress for us. And so we didn't even realize we had money disagreements or money stresses that he and I were both feeling until those were removed. And then it completely set us on a trajectory of raising support in a really fun way together that now we actually really enjoy it. But it definitely did not start off that way because we were both having hidden concerns, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And not all of these have to be from your own personal experience, but that term, unrealized stress, hidden stress, particularly when it comes to finances, that can hit a bunch of different things too. Give us a few examples of what some kind of hidden stressors might be when it comes to finances.
That's a great question. It could boil down to how we were raised, for sure, and also what we find of value. So like when we moved back, all of a sudden I was like, oh gosh, I want my kids to have clothing. We want to have kitchen stuff. We want to have mattresses. Like I was going into family mode and how we spend money. And my husband started going into things to get set up. So like computers and just a lot of big picture items. And I'll just say my husband's a builder as well. So he was wanting to buy tools and things of that nature. So we were both trying to set up our nest. And how it played into raising support is so we were actually kind of going into debt, and we didn't even realize we had stopped giving until we realized we had stopped. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, what has happened? And so he started talking about the stumbling block to raise support for him was because he felt uncomfortable with some of the purchases I was making for our family, whereas I had some of those same stumbling blocks because of what was happening with him.
Right.
We hadn't even talked about it fully. But then once that conversation came to light and we realized, oh gosh, we've got to get our head in the game. And we started prioritizing giving first. We both then felt more confident moving forward in, okay, now we are givers and it feels more comfortable. You're free to ask for people to give to you and to the ministry that you're a part of, because you also recognize you're a part of the same giving game, if that makes sense. And you're a part of kingdom work with your finances.
It does. And in fact, it's funny you say that. Just this morning, just to give a real relevant right now, like potential financial stressor from our life. My wife, Marky, and I are we're about to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary. So we've done
congratulations.
And her middle name is Rose, and she loves roses. And
awesome.
Yesterday, I believe it was, she went to Sam's Club with my son and did some grocery shopping, which is great. With some of her health struggles, if she can go out and go to the store, that's a big win. Well, I don't notice things quite like she does. We're wired differently. But this morning, when I got up and I was having a cup of coffee, I noticed there was this beautiful vase of roses sitting on the kitchen counter. And, my first reaction, to be honest, in my own head, I didn't verbalize any of this. Yeah. First reaction was, now, wait a minute. Did that come out of the grocery budget? Because that's not groceries.
Yep.
And, having been married so long, I do realize that that's actually a really big, important thing to her, beauty. Yeah. And roses in particular. And I also trust her. And I'm sure she got those roses at Sam's Club, not known for having expensive flowers.
Yes,
so, it probably came out of grocery budget, but also it wasn't this permanent thing that set us back. And now we're not going to be able to pay our electricity bill.
Yeah.
But I think when I was younger, particularly when we were raising support many years ago for the first time, that is the sort of thing that might have, it might have stressed me out a little bit. There might have been If there wasn't passive aggression, there might have been a flat out confrontation because that would have affected me.
Yep.
Now we talk about our finances often enough. I'm not concerned that ruined us financially for the next 10 years or anything like that. And we're fully funded, but still, sometimes there can be those things. There can be those things that one spouse would spend money on and see it as a value and part of just doing life. And the other spouse might go, well, no, wait a minute, hold on. And wow. Yeah. And to get past those things, it really takes a lot of communication, doesn't it, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, I think probably even if I think about husbands and wives together raising support, I would say probably communication is the number one place to stress, almost for success, because it can also be the place where it brings division. And so I think communication is key 100%.
Yeah, I've joked off and on. I don't know how true this is or isn't, but I was one of the people that was blessed by a Support Raising Solutions boot camp way back in the day, and it really helped us. But honestly, as huge as that was, and it was massive, I think that one of the biggest things before us, or that my wife and I experienced before that, is we went through a Financial Peace University class, and it got us communicating. Nowadays I know of friends that go through, there's a ministry called Freedom 5-1, and it does kind of financial, like personal finances coaching for ministry leaders. And I've been hearing from people that are like, man, this is really helping me. But it seems like that budget discussion, not being budget driven, but that budget discussion, if you're not having that as a married couple early and sometimes often, man, it can really bring those financial stressors in rather quickly.
Absolutely. And actually, Aaron, that is exactly what my husband and I did. I will say that I did the Bible study and was transformed by the idea of giving. But then we went and took a financial peace course, and it saved our communication with finances, which then saved how we raise support together. It was a gift for sure.
Yeah, great.
I want to interrupt this podcast for a brief heads up. This is Steve Shadrach, author of The God Ask. Support Raising Solutions is running a contest to win an SRS swag pack. Go check out our past podcast episode, number 29, to get details on how you can get involved and possibly win some fun Support Raising Solutions swag, which includes several cool things, including a $100 gift card.
Well, financial stressors, of course, that's just one thing. What else about couples raising and living off support together comes to mind as you think about this topic?
Another thing that comes to mind when I think about this topic is my husband, John, and I are very, very different people. So even how it plays out in a meeting became really important to us. And we really started diving in. This is a very common passage of scripture, but 1 Corinthians 12, the idea we've been given different gifts, different strengths, many parts to one body, but unity is what brings us all together. Like we had to really kind of start to really own how different we are and how we want our support appointments, literally how they look. And so we had to start communicating. Like here's a silly example, but we communicate with each other depending on who we're meeting with. There's 2 point places that we always make sure who's managing that in a meeting. And it's silly, but one of them is who transitions from the building of the rapport to becoming a little bit more formal in the presentation. He always like, okay, who's going to take that one? And then the other person, if someone takes that one, the other person does the ask.
Oh, nice. That's
silly, but we found we were going to support appointments and we hadn't really talked about some of those transitions. And so we would leave an appointment. He'd be like, oh my gosh, why did you let us talk for 30 minutes about nothing? Or how come we were both waiting for the other one to give the ask? And so as silly as those are, we started realizing we had to really come to terms with, hey, whose relationship is stronger here? Who's going to do the ask? Who's going to kind of transition from building rapport into more of the presentation? And once we started getting into a flow of recognizing some of those major transition areas, we started really having fun in this process. And even like thinking about how different we are, it's funny, in our raising support, I have become a little bit of the admin. So I might set up the appointment. I might do, as a ministry, we use MPDX. So I do a lot of the tasks inside of that donor database. But we've assigned it that if I'm doing this, anytime I set up an appointment, he will join me in it. Does that make sense? But that's not how it is for every couple. And so that's how it works for he and I, that I've become the administrator. Now, what's funny is in our personal life, he does more of that. And then I step into it, as part of that process, but he kind of manages it. Whereas in our support raising, it's the opposite. And so again, it was just he and I trying to figure out who's going to manage what. Other words, we're just assuming the other one is doing it or not doing it, or we're both doing it. And so we're trying really hard to continue that communication on the logistics of what does it look like for he and I to own this together.
It's so true. I've shared before that my wife and I were on a support raising meeting together, which normally she's not been able to join me, but she was once, and we didn't do that. We didn't communicate about some of those who says what and when. And I felt like she was like, and I know this wasn't true of her, but it felt like she was dedicated to taking the conversation off track.
That's awesome.
Like, I think I might have very lovingly and very lightly finally kicked her under the table at one point, and kind of did that. You gotta let me finish this.
Exactly.
We got in the car and she apologized. I'm so sorry. I knew that we were going to get to that. And I was like, it's okay, honey. I was like, I made the mistake of not clarifying when I say this, that's because I want to ask them that. And so anyway, boy, that's funny, but that's so true. You have to kind of know your roles. It doesn't mean that you're locked in. There isn't like the guy's role and the girl's role, and that's that. That's not what we're saying. But marriage it's about unity, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And that has to be reflected in how you approach your personal finances as well as your personal support raising.
Yeah, it's such a give and take on any given day. And, I was even thinking as you were talking about you and your wife, there are days I can be really down in my support raising efforts, or I feel discouraged because maybe one of my supporters made a comment, or one of my husbands and our supporters made a comment, and I can get very discouraged. And it is on those days where I'm so grateful to be married, because I can lean on him. If I'm like, hey, I'm having a low season in this. And he's like, that's all right, babe. I've got this right now. It is such a give and take, and we aren't locked into any role, but it is such a gift, because I know many single people who raise support, and it is such a blessing. So I'm not speaking against that as much as I'm speaking one of the advantages of being married, raising support, is you have that physical person to lean into who completely understand every aspect of it. And so I'm grateful for that. I was even going to wonder, do you and Marquis, do you feel that with her, knowing that she's not full-time doing the ministry with you, but is fully engrossed in the ministry with you, if that makes sense? Yeah.
So with her and the health challenges we've documented before, she's very much in the trenches with me. They're just different looking trenches.
Yes.
She's a frontline worker, but she's not on the same line as me. And that's just physically, she's not able, and it's heartbreaking, to be honest. And yet, she's a champion. I mean, she prays, she follows up. I'm not always so aware as what I need to be regarding certain things, and she might say, "Hey, did you know that Eric and Julie had their baby the other day?" Wait, what? And Eric and Julie are on our support team, and I pray for them. And no, I did not do that. And I want to send them a congratulatory card, and she's in it. And sometimes, one of the things that I need to do with her is to remind her of that, because it can be hard for her not to be able to get out and see things and do things that she'd like to. And yet, also when there's life change, when there's legitimate stories of just awesome things that God has brought into as fruit of our ministry, it's so fun to be able to kind of go home that night, so to speak, and say, hey, let me tell you about something that God has done recently because of our partnership, how we are doing this ministry together. And so it is it is that give and take. It is that communication. Even though I have, so I'd say I'm pretty different from you and John, whereas you and John have raised most of your support together. I've had to raise most of our support without her in the room, but it doesn't mean that she's more or less a part of what we're accomplishing together for the kingdom.
Absolutely. And you've spoken to a really valuable point that I think I just want to stress it again, is how you were reminded you want to encourage her in the role that she does play in this. I think we've got to be people and spouses of encouragement. We need to be speaking encouragement into the other. Like, thank you for being an advocate for me, or thank you for praying with this, or thank you for allowing me to have an off week and you kind of stepped in. Like, we just have got to be encouraging, because I think the enemy, of course, is always after division between a husband and wife. Absolutely is that a bullseye of his. But I also think when it comes to money, I mean, you're talking like two major bullseyes of the enemies. And we're saying yes to both of those calls of, we are together, married, doing this together, and we're going to raise support for a ministry that God has called us to. We've got to be encouraging.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw a curveball at you, Corey, because I had a conversation yesterday, and I'm not going to give all the context. It wouldn't be appropriate. It's not the time or the place. But essentially, I was talking with an organization that roughly 10 to 20% of their people that raise and live off support within their organization are married, and their spouse is dead set against living off of and raising support. My heart breaks for those people. But also we might have some people like that listen to this podcast. And so this is one of those moments where I remind everybody, we don't pre-rehearse all this conversation. So Corey, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but man, what would you tell someone that they're in that place right now where their husband or their wife is really just approaching that support raising thing as, well, that's your thing, that's not my thing. You have to do that because that's your part, that's your job, but leave me out of it. I'm not getting that paycheck. My name, my social security number is not associated with that. Maybe it's not quite that caustic, but perhaps it is. What do you tell somebody that finds themselves in that situation?
That is actually a very beautiful question, because I think there is, that's real life. Probably you're right for many people. I mean, I guess I would approach it in a couple ways. I would first probably, if I was, let's say, coaching someone in this specific example, I would maybe really be asking the question, hey, tell me, what are the reasons? Like, is this division, is this going to be causing division in your marriage from here on out? Like, I would really want to get to some of those root things, like how deep is that animosity, I guess, towards raising support.
Right.
Because if it's a huge one, I would like to see that come together.
Right.
We offer a lot. Spouses come to boot camp. We had one spouse that was completely against it. She came to boot camp to join her husband, went through the whole thing, and she wasn't like the biggest cheerleader at the end of it, but she finally realized, hey, you know what? More people do this than I thought, and I can now at least see biblical perspectives to it. Again, we didn't win her over fully, but having her join in on some of the biblical understanding at least help some of the negativity be removed from the conversation. They still aren't, again, fully engaged, but the animosity against has been removed. And I see that as a huge home run and celebratory event,
Yeah.
So I would say it's probably the first thing I would want to do is how far down does that animosity go? And is there a way that we can approach it?
Yeah.
So I would say that would be the first thing. The second thing is they're going to need encouragement in their life. They're going to need someone who can speak freedom for them in that. I will say we have had, and again, I'm not trying to be negative. There have been other people that we have found in this scenario come through our own ministry, and at the end of the day, they were not able to raise their funds. I wonder if there is a level of, man, if at home there is no encouragement there, it could make your wall twice as high, like those obstacles that you have to jump over twice as high. God is bigger than all those walls that could be brought in there, and He can do it for sure. He is the provider. But I would say to that person who maybe is not finding an encouragement at home, find someone that you can be authentic with, find someone that can be an encourager to you in a way that is biblical, that it keeps you moving forward when you're having a hard day.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to push it a little harder here.
Okay, let's do it.
What about if they're just not doing it? What if they're dead set against it? Is there and I'm not like saying that this is the end, you should get out of ministry. Like I'm not going that far. And yet I am pretty concerned for the longevity of the spiritual health, the family's health, just a lot of things there.
Yes.
What would you counsel someone that, maybe their spouse went to the SRS boot camp, or maybe they at least read the God Ask and did some of the Bible study, and they're just fighting it.
Yeah.
Wow. Now what?
Okay, if I was a friend talking to them, might be a little different than if I had my MPD coaching hat on.
All right, Corey,
I
you are
was-
our friend. Tell us,
Okay.
for the listener, that they find that themselves right now in this unenviable position.
Yes.
What would you tell them as their friend?
As a friend, I would probably say there would be no reason to step into something that is already causing division in your marriage. Maybe there is another avenue, because I don't think God would want division in your marriage. So I would probably venture to say that that might not be the next step for them. Now, again, it's hard. Every circumstance is different. So I say that kind of blindly, not knowing the in particulars of people's scenarios that might be listening to this, because the last thing I want to do is discourage it. But as a ministry, I don't think a ministry should ever, we've had some people come through and I say, if they just don't want to do it, I understand. But if it's an actual DNA issue, then as a back-to-back employee, I don't want to cause division in someone's marriage. And so if they just don't, if they don't like it and they don't want to be a part of it and they're not needing to do it, I'm okay with that. But if it is a DNA issue, like I am dead set against it, then I would probably not want to move forward with them in that role, because marriage is hard enough, right? And so I think to forcefully add something else to it.
Speaking of which, by the way, how long have you and John been married?
We are celebrating our 24th wedding anniversary this month, which is March.
We're both old heads in that regard.
Yes, exactly. And we know marriage can be hard. The world throws marriages curveballs, and it takes every ounce of us loving Jesus to continue moving forward at times. Not all the time. I love him desperately and I'm thankful. But I think if there was something of that, of great division, I don't know if I would step into it willingly.
Yeah. Let me say this too. If you as the listener, you find yourself there and right now you're starting to question all sorts of different things. Number one, we're just a couple of talking heads on a podcast.
Yes.
You need to seek wisdom for people that love God and have been walking with him for years, elder types, if you will, from the Bible. But also you're not necessarily disqualified from ministry just because you and your spouse aren't seeing eye to eye on something, and there needs to be some more maturity or growth before you take a step like this. You're not disqualified. You're not getting kicked out. Perhaps the organization you've been thinking about going with might not be the best fit for you right now.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be a crisis moment for you. And we encourage you to seek your first love in God. But then if you're married, then seek your second love as well. Seek your spouse. Know that they are a ministry in unto themselves, and it might very well be that there's a day where you raise and live off support together, but perhaps it shouldn't be this day. And so we encourage you to very prayerfully and wisely proceed rather than making rash decisions.
Yes, that's great advice.
Well, Corey, as we move to a close, I certainly appreciate you kind of bringing up this whole tension and also joy of husband and wives working together for MPD. Any closing thoughts or final words of advice that you might give a listener who right now their marriage is being affected by the MPD process?
Final thoughts, right? These are the most important things that people are going to listen to right now.
Or at least the ones we forgot to mention up until now. Like, do you have a date night or do you not?
No, that's great. I would say celebrate often. And if there is a hard season, maybe step away from it for a second. Maybe it is a day, maybe it's a weekend, maybe it's a couple weeks, but celebrate each other. And do not forget that it is a team sport, and that lean in on each other and trust their instincts as well as trusting your own. Yeah, celebrate. That would be my final words. Encourage and celebrate.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, Corey, for joining me today on this podcast. I certainly appreciate it. Thanks for bringing your wisdom, and may God bless you and John for another 24 plus years of raising and living off support.
Thank you. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.